Shalom, shalom. My name is Lamadi Yahoo, and in this particular YouTube clip, I'm actually going to go over the name Jesus, Yeshua, Yeshua, Yahushua, things like that. And then after that, I might touch on a little bit about Yiddish, what people think Yiddish is, and then finally at the conclusion of the matter as to calling on the Messiah's name and the belief behind that. For this particular YouTube clip, though, I'm not going to go too in depth with certain Hebrew words, but I will go over a little bit with the word, the letter actually in Hebrew, what they consider the Wa or the Vav or the U. I'm actually going to go over that a little bit because that seems to be kind of a thorn in us understanding the Hebrew names and titles. Now, I hope we all understand that according to Zephaniah 3:9, that we don't have a pure language yet. Okay, so because I know we don't have a pure language yet, I don't want to take the time and tell you that the way I say is absolute or the way you see other people say it is the absolute truth. The design, on the other hand, is to try to get as close as we can until he comes to set things in order. So therefore, if a brother or a sister of mine says it a different way, that should not be a deterrent for me not to fellowship or associate myself with my brothers and sisters just because they don't pronounce it the way I pronounce it. On the other hand, what I do is if they want to know why I pronounce it a certain way, I try to show them the best way in the Hebrew to kind of for them to see why it is. And so this is what I'm actually going to go over today. It's going to briefly be over the Father's name, briefly over the Messiah's name, and then how it's actually shortened to Yeshua, or Yeshua, some would say. We're going to actually go over that. So without further ado, I'm going to start, actually I'm going to work myself backwards. In other words, I'm going to start with the modern concept, or Jesus, and then I'm going to work my way back to the way it was in the scriptures. All right, so I got some history, some paperwork from like the Heritage Encyclopedia and some other history. So I will be reading some of those, and then a commentary that I've read, and I encourage you all to hear it and see what this says. And then after that, as we work our way back from getting out of the name Jesus, which I know majority have no problem. I've seen some where they teach it doesn't matter. It's you know, he knows who you're referring to and some things like that. So I'm actually going to go over some of these things. And then after we go over these things, you know, then at this point you do your research. And as the scripture says, study to show yourself approved. And so that's the design of what we're supposed to be. We're supposed to be a light and have an understanding of the name. And so as we break the name down, we're going to see why he says he comes in his Father's name. We're going to actually see that his name actually means salvation. You know, we're actually going to go through these things. And then after that, you judge as to how the Father leads you into researching his name. Okay, we should not have so much of a dogmatic way of dealing with people. If you come across your brothers, new brothers in the faith, or if you come across Christians that want to know and you have the knowledge of it, you shouldn't just dog them out because they don't have that knowledge that you have yet. So we're actually going to go over some of these things, and then as we go through these things, I pray that we all get a knowledge and understanding of exactly what the Most High wants us to do. So without further ado, I'm going to be going back and forth with some of my notes that I have in the scriptures, and basically just fellowship. All right, so one of my notes that I have in here, the name Jesus. All right, the name Jesus itself came in about 1522 A.D. That's when the name Jesus actually came in on the scene. Prior to that, you know, if I was using Greek and Latin, which I'm going to use the Heritage Dictionary's definition, I said, but what we need to understand though is that that's a new name. That's not even 500 years old name. It's very new. It's a very common name. And so when we think about Acts 4:12, another name given, which man be saved, things like that, the name Jesus wasn't in existence yet. You know, so we have to go back and put things. What we try to do today, or some people try to do today, is they try to take what the scripture says and apply it to today's time. And what we really need to do is understand at their time and apply our day and go back to their time and work it that way versus in reverse. All right, so I'm going to read to you what the American Heritage Dictionary states about the name Jesus. Okay, It says, according to the American Heritage Dictionary, the etymology origin of Jesus is of a late Latin spelled Isus, which is spelled I-S-U-S, in Greek Jesus, in Aramaic Yeshua, and in Hebrew Yashua or Yahusha. And I will be going over the last two later in this teaching. Now keep in mind, because there's no J in Greek and Latin and Hebrew and Aramaic, it is in English, right? So the five sources I'm expressing that the name Jesus is coming from is from English, it's coming from the Latin, it's coming from the Greek, it's coming from the Aramaic, it's coming from the Hebrew. In other words, there's a slight portion of that in all five languages inside this name Jesus. I'm not an advocate, I don't promote Jesus or anything like that, but I'm showing you how to get out of or work our way back from Jesus back to his original name. Alright, the next thing I want to talk about is, everyone understands that the letter J is new. Okay, it comes from an I, and the I had a Y sound, and we'll go over that in just a minute. But also that it's not even 500 years old. The J is new. It's a new letter added to the alphabets of the English. And so if anyone has a really good encyclopedia or dictionary, just look up the letter J and it'll tell you how new this actual letter is. The last letter added. So therefore, we know by definition of understanding that it couldn't have been Jesus even at that time. But we're going to even go back to the Greek to show that it even wasn't there neither. Okay, some of I wrote down some things that I've heard encountering some even Messianic brothers and sisters, but more so the Christians. And these are the things that some of the explanations they gave me. One is, it doesn't matter. He knows my heart. The other one is, I don't speak Hebrew. The next one is, this is nothing more than wordplay. Okay, now why they say wordplay is quite natural. They don't understand why we say the Hebrew name. So because they don't have that understanding, it turns into, in their eyes, word manipulation. Okay. My Bible says Jesus. I only use the King James Version. Okay, and the last but not least, I have been saved by that name. Okay, so these are all the names that or the excuses that I would come across as to why they refuse to use the name. Okay, and so, but if I was to destroy their name, they would have a problem with that. But when we destroy the Messiah's name, it's okay. Okay, that's not a good answer. None of those are good answers as to why they would do that, other than the scriptures tell you, seek with all your heart. So they need to seek out the Father. Sure, if you start off, everyone or most people that I've come across started Christianity. Okay, after that, they started searching, they started learning, and as they started going into it, they noticed that, well, there's a little bit more to this than what the Christian or Christianity is teaching. And then they start doing more research and find out, well, wait a minute, he had an original name. Why would he change his name? Who changed his name from the Hebrew to the Latin to the Greek and to the English? Who gave that authority to do that? Okay, so as we start learning these things, we start saying about names, and one of the things we need to understand dealing with names is names never translate. Names never translate. Names only transliterate, meaning by sound. So in other words, if I say, and I don't use the word holy, but let's just go for that for an example. If I say holy in English, they'll say it translates from the Hebrew Kadash or Kodesh. Okay, so they say that's a translation. Okay, but when it comes to a name, names don't translate, they transliterate, meaning now I got to find the closest letters in that language that come close to this name. So if I go over to Yashar'al, and let's say my name is Chris. Okay, well, I got to find the Hebrew equivalent to the word Chris. Okay, and so therefore, because if I go over there and you say my name differently because you translate it where you want it, I may not turn around and see what you're talking about. But if you say something close to Chris or Cross or whatever you want to say, then I might turn around because I think you're trying to speak to me. So it's trying to transliterate, meaning by sound, to make sure that we got that understanding. I don't want to squeeze too much olive juice out of that, but the point is that's what it's about. Okay, olive juice out of that, but the point is that's what it's about. Okay, so so for us to kind of use these statements, we're going to actually go over these later on. All right, I did put up on this YouTube clip. After I did this, I'm actually going to attach it, and I'm going to give you a picture of a King James 1611 edition with the Messiah's name in it. Okay, and so what you're going to see though is the way they spell Messiah, or the Messiah's name, and the 1611 is this way. Okay, that's how it's spelled in the 1611 King James. And so because it's spelled this way, what we're first going to focus on first is this particular letter right here, what they consider in Greek the iota. Okay, we're actually going to go over this, and we'll probably tackle this later. I might just talk about this more briefly because typically adding the US or S at the end in Greek is like how they do all their deities. Okay, Zeus, Theos, and Dios, and all that stuff. That's how they make it masculine in the Greek culture. So that's not really my concern here. Is first let's get this letter going. Okay. Now, so one of the things I want to talk about, I guess, when it comes to the 1611 is when people say it's in their King James, I say, okay, well then you're saying you only do the King James. If you only do the King James, then let's go look at the very first King James that came out. Now, when you get a 1611 King James, obviously there's no no J at all in that book. Okay. The second thing, off topic, is even with the word Leviticus, with the V there, it actually is there with a U. The word heaven in the 1611 is not with the V there, it's actually with the U. Why? Because that quote-unquote V actually had a U sound, and we'll go over that later on. But at any rate, what I want them to see is, okay, if you're going to use 1611, King James, let's go look at the original King James 1611, and you'll see that that's not true, that the name, even back then, was never called Jesus. All right. Now, because I know that, the first thing I need to know is, so what's up? What's the sound of this iota? Okay, and so what I like to do is, and I'm not a huge advocate of strong concordance, but I know everyone just about has one that are doing studies and things like that, and they got lexicons and etymology books and so on. So my point is, what I'm going to do actually is use a concordance to kind of show you some of the things about the Messiah's name. All right, so with the Messiah's name, in the Greek it says Jesus. So I'm going to take this off here, and I'm going to show you in the concordance what sound this I makes. Okay, so the best place to look at that in your concordance is number 2503, the Greek number 2503, and I'm going to read exactly what it says in that in the concordance there. Okay, so 2503 in your concordance says the iota of a Hebrew origin, the 10th letter of the Hebrew alphabet. Okay, so it tells me right now this I, meaning iota, comes from Hebrew. So that's the first thing I see. The second thing it says, it comes from the 10th Hebrew letter, right? So I guess the next question would be, what is the 10th Hebrew letter in the Hebrew? And obviously I'm going to go ahead and tell you, I have to look it up. It's going to be the Yud, or someone says Yod. Okay? So if the Greek is telling me that this iota comes from Hebrew, right? It says Hebrew. And then next it says it comes from the 10th letter. The 10th letter is a Yod. Okay? If I was to use Paleo, or the modern Hebrew there. The Yod. Okay? So that tells me then, back in that time period, it had a Y sound. The I actually had a Y sound back in their time. So now that I have the first sound of the Messiah's name in the Greek, the next thing I need to do is actually look up the name Jesus in the concordance. Okay? And so in the Greek, for the concordance number for Jesus is actually Greek number 2424. Okay, Greek number 2424. Okay, and of course you're going to find this here, and we already by definition just found out that this had a Y sound. So for all intents and purposes, I'm going to put Jesus, or some to say Jesus for now. But my point is, now I know that it had a Y sound and not a J, and I know that the I makes a Y sound. Okay. Next thing you know is, let's go to see what Greek number 2424 says. Okay, it says definition, Greek 2424 is of a Hebrew origin. Again, it starts telling you again this is of a Hebrew origin. Okay, so if 2424 tells me that the name Jesus comes from a Hebrew origin, then I need to go into the Hebrew and see what 3091 says in the Hebrew, because that's where it's coming from. Hebrew number 3091. Okay. Now, in 3091, it says, in Hebrew, it states the following: Yahushua, or Yahusha, or someone says Yahshua, from. Now, these are two Hebrew words put together. Okay, from Hebrew numbers 3068 and 3467. Okay. Now, the reason why it has two, and let me write it in Hebrew here. The reason why it gives you these two forms in the concordance, Yahoo, is this one, and it has, and this is so big, and it has this one. These two forms. Okay. Now, out of these two forms, this form here, let me tell you, all together, these two forms together, right, is only 218 times in the Scriptures. Out of the 218 times, two of them is translated like this. Only two. All the 216 are translated like this. Okay? And so, where you can find those, I actually wrote it down, if you want to take a look at it in the Hebrew, not in your English. If you want to take a look at that, you'll find that in Devarim or Deuteronomy chapter 3, verse 21, and Judges or Shoftim or Judges chapter 2, verse 7. Those two places you'll actually see it with this extra U right here, or they consider wa there. Okay. All the rest of the times you're going to see that it actually comes in this form right here, as they say, like Joshua's name and so forth. All right. Couple things. Before we actually go into that part, I want to do a quote from a Gentile. They say he's a pagan Gentile at that. But he had some interesting things to say back in 178 CE. 178 CE. He actually had something interesting to say back then. And so I want to read exactly what he said. Okay. It says, around 178 CE, Celsius states the following concerning pronunciation of the Messiah's name. He says, the Nazarenes assumed that by pronouncing the name of their teacher, they are armed against the powers of the earth and the air. And they are quite insistent on how to pronounce the name as the means of protection. Pronounce it improperly, they say, and it is ineffective. Greek and Latin will not do. It must be said in a barbarian tongue to work. So, first of all, he looks at Hebrew as being a barbarian tongue. Okay. Now, of course, we know that's not a barbarian tongue, but this is his way. Again, I just told you he's a Gentile. All right. And so, first thing off, he's saying that he's dealing with these, at that time, I think in his paper it says Christians, right? But at this time, it's the Hebrews and, let's say, the late Christians are adapting the Messiah's name, but they want to change it into their language. Okay? And so, he's saying that the Greek language will not do. So, something we need to understand is during the Messiah's time, the names sprang out in other languages. The people at that time were Hebrews and Christians. The Hebrews would believe, of course, that the Greek alphabet and the Latin lacks the letters necessary to correctly convey how the name is to be pronounced in Hebrew. Why? Because in the other languages, for example, Greek, there's no SH sound. There is none. Okay? So they have a signal, or the S, that's it. So they can't say the sh sound. Okay? And so, and if you just look at all the rest of the language, you'll see that each language is lacking a letter. Okay? To be able to pronounce the Mashiach's name or the Messiah's name properly. So the argument to them was like, look, we can't put it in these other languages because you're taken away from the name. right? Because that's how actually linguistics will actually tell you that every time you translate a language from one language to another, it loses some form of value. Okay, and so you can imagine if it came from Hebrew to Greek to Latin to English, that it's lost a lot of value and meaning. And even when it went to Aramaic, it got shortened, which we'll go over later on. All right. The next thing I want to talk about, but like I said before, is I'm going to actually start talking about the pronunciation of the name. But before I actually say that, I still need to make sure it's clear that we do not have a pure language at this time. Okay, we do not have a pure language at this time. And I'm going to give you a scripture that says so, because I don't want to come back and say that I'm saying this is the absolute way of saying the Messiah's name and the Father's name. But at the same time, I am going to show how close we can get. Okay, so I'm going to read Zephaniah chapter 3, verse 9. Yeah, I just look it up here. Zephaniah chapter 3. Chapter 3, verse 9. I'm going to use my computer here. Okay. 3 verse 9 states, "For then will I turn to the people a pure language, that they may all call upon the name of Yahweh to serve him with one consent." Okay, that's Zephaniah 3:9 in the King James. So I'm just letting you know from the start as we go into this, keep in mind that I'm not saying that you're wrong and I'm right. I'm just saying that that's the part. Now, the only way I probably would disassociate myself, per se, from a person is if, you know, they decide to say, listen, it's going to be these pagan titles. If I'm going to use Lord, I'm going to use God. That's just the way it is. And I'm saying, well, listen, brother, these names were used for other deities, meaning God itself means, it's an abstract term. It means I can go to Hindus and say God, and they say sure. I can go to a Buddhist and say God, and they say sure. You know, so my point is, I can see the same thing with Lord. Of course, in Europe, they got the House of Lords. So I'm saying is, these things here, we're saying that we rather use the name. Okay, titles, on the other hand, you know, I did a teaching on Elohim, and so I'm not going to go back onto that. But my point is, the only time I would do that is if you're going to tell me, you know, because as Hebrews, we need to keep it in its context, and I believe that's the best way to do the Father's will and His work. All right, so I won't belabor that anymore. Now, so I want to go over the first 3 letters of the Messiah's name. Okay, the first 3 letters of the Messiah's name is the Yod, the Hey, and the U. For you paleo, you know, of course we know there's this here, this, and this. Okay, but at any rate, I'm only using this here because the problem with vowel pointing and things like that. There's no problem with the paleo with vowel pointing. On the other hand, though, this letter here is going to cause an issue in all the languages, which we'll go over later on. Okay, so I want to go over the first 3 letters, and I'm not going to go over all the concordance numbers, but I'm going to give them to you. I'm actually going to give you all the concordance number where you can see how they consider pronouncing the name. Okay, so from start in the concordance, if you start from Hebrew numbers 3075 and stop at 3092, you're going to see that they actually spell it like this here. Yan / ho. Okay. And I'll talk about this here in just a minute. This here, on the other hand, the only way you can get this E, or this yeah, is if you add a Shiva to this here. So what I'm saying is, if this is the Yod, the only way you can get yeah is I add 2 dots, which is considered a Shiva. And I don't know why they would want to call it Shiva, because that's another pagan deity. But at any rate, here it is. They add the Shiva, now it becomes yeah. And if you know anything about Masoretic vowel pointing, you know that it was there. They added it to make sounds. Also, especially concerning the Creator's name, they use it to manipulate it so that you won't say the Creator's name. Okay, and so therefore, instead of saying Yah, you say yeah. You know, instead of saying the U, you should use the Va and some other stuff like that. So they did that on purpose. But the point is, that the yet is wrong. It's a wrong transliteration of that letter there. It actually should be Yah. And I don't think anyone has any problems with the Yah, at least not my understanding. But if you do, at any time, give me an email, and I'll go over it, and I'll shoot you some literature that talks about this information. All right. So I'm going to change that yeah, and I'm going to put Yah there, so that we can kind of keep this in context here. Okay. Last part is the ho there, which is this here. Now it has an O sound here, as it would say. Now before I talk about that, I'm going to give you another series or sequence of numbers in Hebrew that actually says it a little different. Okay? And that one's going to be starting from Hebrew number 3061 and stop at 3067. And in 3067, here you have, and I'm just going to shorten this here so you can kind of see what I'm talking about. Because I want to put both of them side by side together so you can kind of see what's going on here. Alright, so first one we got, it was Yahoo. The second one we got was Yahoo. Okay, those are two you're going to see. Okay, in those sequence of numbers, Hebrew numbers that I've given you. Alright, now, because of this, I decided to actually talk about a little bit about it. I'm not going to go in depth with it, but these are things that I want to talk about as far as, or spend a little time on, as far as this particular letter here that's considered V, W, U, and O. All this is for this one particular Hebrew letter. Okay. Now, what I did was, in this particular series, after I finish talking, I'm going to actually put up some history behind these letters, these English letters that you see. Okay, so because I don't want to talk about that and burn up my tape. All right, so what we have here is, if you understand back in the time, my purpose of the 1611 about this V was to tell you that it had a U sound. Okay, but during the history though, this V, before it became softened like this, it was like this here. They said by getting a W, they put it another V, meaning that these are two V's, as they would say. Okay, but what gives you the understanding of the sound of that is it says this becomes a W, whereas you see this in 1611 where this V, actually the V is not there present, but it was a U, like Leviticus instead of Leviticus. Okay, not heaven, but have-un, for example, have-un, and so therefore the W, on the other hand, tells you that, and I believe just exactly that. Let me tell you with the U. So you already see the V and the W coming together with this U sound. This O, on the other hand, if I put two O's together, as in pool, right, it has an U sound also. So all these are somewhat linked in form and somewhat in sound. Okay, but the point is, this is a huge controversy behind this letter, and I'm going to tell you why I decided to go with the U sound of the U. Since everything links that way, let me give you an example. W tells you that. W means W. W. It's telling you it's two U's. That's why I use that. Now, when I get to things like the tribe of Yehuda, for an example. I know people have probably seen some teaching on this here, but Yehuda, okay, it's spelled like this here in Hebrew. That's Yehuda. Now, I'm going to write underneath Yehuda, I'm going to write the father's name. Okay? And underneath that, I'm going to write the Messiah's name. Okay? And that's... Okay, so by definition here, if we say Yehuda, right? The Yahoo portion of it in Yehuda is right here. This portion here is Yahoo. Yahuda, right? Now the point secondly is, that's the same thing in the Father's name. It's the same exact letter. Same thing in Messiah's name. Okay, so the scripture says he came in his father's name. I see this portion here. There's the Messiah, there's it, and then Yehuda. Now, the difference between the reason why I use Yehuda is if I take out the Dalet or the D in Yehuda's name. Okay, if I take this D out in Yehuda's name, this Dalet here, if I take this and remove it, it spells the Creator's name. Right there, same thing. So, by that understanding, if I understand Yahu and then Da, the only difference is I take the Dalet out, then why would it change to another sound? It doesn't. Okay? But if you say, for example, because at that point you have to say Yawada and some other stuff, you know. But again, I put on some history behind the sound of the W became modern. In other words, the sound Wah. The Wah sound actually is a modern sound. And again, I'll put that on the YouTube so you can read it for yourself. Okay, that's not a new thing. I mean, it's not an old thing. It's new. Before that, it was a double U. It was two U sounds. Okay? So that's why I'm saying the Father's name, right here, Messiah's name. And then, of course, if you get you look in your concordance, look up Yirmiyahu, Yeshayahu, Zechariahu. When you see all of them, they also have these three letters on here. And it's U at the end of those names also. Okay, and so I might even add that to this YouTube clip in a form of a PowerPoint. But my point is, that's why I decided to go with that, the U sound. Now, that wasn't only my deciding factor, was the concordance and lexicons and the internet and things like that. But if you was to go to what they consider South Africa, if you was to go there, the Hebrews there, as they call them Jews, but they don't say, for example, shalom, like we say shalom. They don't say shalom. They say shalom. That's what they say, shalom. And so, again, showing that even in there, that they recognize the U sound.
I came into this village and the first word I heard was shalom,
Yes.
a Hebrew word.
Yes.
How is that possible? How is it that the Lemba is speaking Hebrew?
The Lembas are the original Hebrews, and they were scattered, as you know, and they crossed into Africa. So they were scattered all over. So in South Africa, in many parts of South Africa, you find the Lembas who are actually Hebrews.
Hebrew. So the Lembas claim to be descendants of ancient Israelites?
Not claim, they are.
They are.
They are.
Okay.
We are the original African Hebrew. We are scattered all over.
Okay, so I use a combination of reasons as to why, meaning stuff that I found in looking up history, linguistically, people are realistically saying it before our time, before we actually took on, as a people over here, took on that sound and things like that. So I use a whole combination and say, you know what, this is the closest that it's come, that I've seen within my research. Okay, and I also did do a research on the Wah sound because quite naturally, you know, I know a lot of us like Wah, like Shalom or things like that. I know we like it, and that does separate us from all other people, right? Because we're the only ones that realistically talk like that. But the point behind it is that Wah sound actually is a new sound. And so when you look up the sound Wah, you'll see that it's actually modern. All right, but again, I still fellowship with all brothers and sisters, no matter how you say it. But that's my reason as to why I use it, because to me that was the closest sound according to the research that I came across. Okay. All right. Let me keep going here. And so Yiddish. Boy, that's just something there. All right. A lot of people think that that these letters in Hebrew, you know, these modern Hebrew letters or Aramaic letters, things like that, is Yiddish. Okay, that's not true. Okay, what happens is, and I'm going to use their term, the 22 letters evolved, as they would say. Okay, but what I'm getting at is the 22 letters in ancient time, right? Because we can give these all ancient writings to each one of these things. And my point behind it is, they're the same 22 letters, just in a different form, i.e. taking on an Aramaic form and a modern Hebrew form. What makes it Yiddish is pronunciation or sound. What is Yiddish is, it's a combination of European languages, Russia, Germany, Italian, and French. Okay, and with those and placing vowels into them comes up with this certain sound, like Russians, you know, Kovacevic and all this modern V sounding stuff. But my point is that Yiddish is only something that's done with sound and not with the letters. 22 ancient letters, 22 modern letters, some say 23. But my point is that the letters itself only changed throughout time, and mostly it changed when it came out of exile, out of Babylon. If you kind of get into Ezra and Nehemiah, which we're going to go to in just a little bit, to kind of show you, even in the name, for example, Yahusha, or as they would say, Yeshua, you'll see that it was shortened, and we're going to go into that in just a minute. So I understand, you know, we don't want to we want to get rid of the modern Hebrew writing, and even some don't even like some of the paleo, and some may like the pictograph and things like that. But the problem is that Yiddish is only something that has a sound, not so much the letters. Okay. So I hope that kind of clears up a little bit about what they consider Yiddish is. Okay. All right. Let's go in a little further here. I'm going to skip over the history of the W, like I said, because about the 1300s is when it actually came in with the Y and some other stuff. So, but I will post that for you guys, and you guys can look it up on your own and then do a extensive research if you like. All right. Now, let's get into the pronunciation. What I'm saying is, we said that earlier that 3068, Hebrew number 3068, is the Father's name. Okay, that's right here. All right. Then it says 3467 in Hebrew is the other part of the Messiah's name, which is Yashar'al. Now I'm gonna make this a modern sound, but my point is, if you was to read history, they'll say the Aleph and the Ayin are silent. Okay. My problem is I don't think the Father makes silent letters. Okay. But the reason why they say silent is because there's no English word to make guttural sounds. Okay. So the Aleph having a /watery sound, as some would say, there's no realistically English letter for that, so it's considered silent in our language. Second one is the chet, or the ayin, like chetzah for the word Esau, right? So the word Esau, as we say, is actually a chetzah. And so, but my point is, there's no sound, there's no letter for that, so they say that's silent. Okay, but anyway, so for all intents and purposes, I'm going to say Yasha, as a lot of people like to say. Now, when you put these two letters together, when you merge letters together, you're going to see this is dropped, and you're going to see this is dropped. Okay? So what happens is you have Yahu, which is this portion here, and then you got Shah. Okay? So here, meaning he salvation, or he saves, as they would say, and this is the Father's name. So what happens is when you put these two together, now it says Yahu is, for example, is implied. Yahu is salvation, because this actually is a word for salvation. Okay, so Yahu is salvation. Now, of course, that corresponds with Matthew chapter 1. I can start about verse 21, and it says that he will save his people. So his name itself, he came in his Father's name, which is right here, and his name means salvation, which is right here. Okay, that's how they kind of put those two letters together. All right. So again, if you have any questions about that, feel free to give me a call. And for your convenience, I will actually put another posting on as to showing you, for example, the prophet's name. I gave 3 prophets' names, and in that, which was Yirmiyahu, the 3 that I talked about, Yirmiyahu, Yeshayahu, and Zechariahu. And I put the 3 letters there to show you the sounds of even their names. So therefore, with all of this information, that was the reason why I used the word Yahu. I met a brother a long time ago that used it also. And what he encouraged me to do is the same thing. Go research it for yourself and come back, and we can talk about it. And so that's what I encourage you all to do. Go research it and see how these letters go in linguistics, etymology, and figure out all these things, and then come to the conclusion of what you have. All right. So I'm actually speeding through my presentation here because I want to get to the name changing from, for example, Yashar'al to Yeshua here. Okay. Now the only way you can get Yeshua, for example, you would drop this, right? And there's your Yah. And the only way you can get Shu at this point is you add what they consider a kibbutz, which is 3 dots. Now, again, that's adding a vowel point. So that's the only way you're going to get an oo sound, because the kibbutz makes a oo sound, at least in modern vowel pointing. And so that's why I don't use Yeshua, because if I was looking at Tanakh or any Hebrew book, you're going to see these letters right here. These 5 letters is what you see all the time, with the exception of 2. Okay, which they had that thing there. Now, Shua, on the other hand, the word Shua means cry, it means wealth, it means rich. And I'll give you those Hebrew course later. But my point is, that's the word Shua, just Shua alone. And that's not what the Messiah said he came to do. He didn't come to cry, he didn't come to bring riches. He came to restore Yisrael back together and be the mediator, i.e. a high priest, to the Father. So, I know people and talk about, the Christians serve the Messiah. Okay, meaning they worship the Messiah. Okay, Messianic Hebrews really don't serve or worship the Messiah. They worship the Father. But just like it is in the Tanakh or in the Torah, whereas Yisrael, whenever they want to see the Father, they go see the high priest. So that was the mediator between Yisrael and the Father. It's the same concept with the Messiah. He's the high priest. So after the order of Melchizedek, if I was to use Ibrahim, but the point, and Tehillim, but the point is, here it is, that he is that mediator. So I am serving the Father, I'm worshiping the Father, and by definition, if you was to look up what the Messiah said, I didn't come to serve. Okay. He also said that, why do you call me good? Only one good is Elohim. But my point is, he's trying to point us back to the Father. So if I decide to take on his footsteps, he never said, in a sense, worship him. He's more so saying, look, worship the Father, but you guys, my lost sheep, have lost this, so I'm coming to show them that you need to go back to the Father. So we're not worshiping the Messiah, okay? We're worshiping the Father. And maybe when I decide to do a Trinity tape, you're going to see, because I'm not a Trinity or triune type thinker, and I think that that's wrong. And where Trinity stuff comes from is through like Egyptians and Greeks and things like that. And so if I decide to go through that, I'll go over Trinity and how that kind of applied, how that bleached or blended into the Christian belief. And then ultimately, now you have that blended in some Messianic Hebrews. All right, so Yahweh's name, Shah, salvation. Okay, so now what's the proof, for example, because I can tell you 342, Hebrew numbers 342 and Hebrew numbers 343 are the words for Yeshua. Okay, so once I see, there it is. That's Yeshua's name. All right, so that's what I wanted to kind of get into. All right, so without further ado, I want to read something to you guys. This is out of Ezra chapter 3, verse 2. Ezra chapter 3, verse 2. Okay. And, by the way, now, in Ezra, that's an Aramaic book, just like Nehemiah. Parts of that are Aramaic. And so the part that I want you all to see, though, is in Ezra 3:2, it says, then stood Yeshua, the son of Yosadik. That's what it says. Yeshua, son of Zadik. Now, and it's spelled Yeshua just like this here. Well, you can find that same name, the same exact name, same exact priest, or high priest, in Zechariah 6:11. I want to say Zechariah 6:11 has the same people, but in Zechariah 6:11, it doesn't have this. It actually has this. Same thing if you was to go into Nehemiah. Now in Nehemiah, let me see here. In Nehemiah chapter 8, verse 17, it says, Yeshua, son of Nun. Now, of course, you know that Yeshua, son of Nun, was the one as this commonly called Joshua, son of Nun, and that was in the Torah. Okay, you can look at that up in Numbers 11:28. You'll see his name. It's a servant of Moshe or Masha or Moses, he would say. But that's the same one. And in there, it has his name like this. So what happened, why is it in Ezra and in Nehemiah spelled this way, but in all the other books it's spelled this way? It's because they were coming out of Babylon, Ezra and Nehemiah. At that time, coming out of Babylon, they took on the Babylonian or the Aramaic of that time, where it shortened it. So it kind of took out, for example, this this portion here. This is taken out. Of course, this is moved over here. But the point is, it's been shortened. It's been changed. Okay. But the proof of that, obviously, is what I want you to see was that if, and by definition, Yahushua, or as he said, Joshua, son of Nun, what that means is the reason why Joshua's name, before it was Hoshea or Hosea. Okay. Then after that, it was changed to Yahushua. Why? Because he's leading his people into the promised land, or he's like a prototype, if you will, of the Messiah and what he's going to do, lead us back into the promised land. But so he became that type and shadow per se. And then of course Nun means life. Okay, and so same thing with the Messiah. He's the same thing. Now my point though is that if you look those two up on your own, Ezra and Nehemiah and Numbers and Shoftim, if you read those, you'll see itself that these names are actually shortened in Aramaic, and it came out and they took on some of the Babylonian language, or the Aramaic of it, and the Aramaic shortened it. Okay? So that concludes the understanding of why I don't use Yeshua, especially if I know that now. And by the way, if you guys were to look this up, Yeshua, you will see that it comes out 28 times in the scriptures. And all 28 times it's in Ezra and Nehemiah. Nowhere else, other than Chronicles, the two places in Chronicles, but Chronicles is telling you about Ezra and Nehemiah. So my point, though, is Ezra and Nehemiah, an Aramaic book, and quite naturally took on the Aramaic dialect and came out with that, and it changed. They shortened the name. And so, therefore, you won't find that nowhere else in the Scriptures. Okay? All right, now, about the name, the importance of the name. Okay? In Hebrew culture, I think we all know, if not, you will know, that names are very important in Hebrew. Very important. Okay? And so, I gave a couple of scriptures here. One is going to be in Mishli or Proverbs 18:10, where it says it's a strong tower. Okay? Proverbs or Mishli 22, verse 1. A good name is preferable to great riches. Favor is better than silver and gold. Ecclesiastes, Kohelet, chapter 7, verse 1. A good name is better than precious oil, and the days of death than the days of one's birth. Okay? So, these are just things that tell you about the name. Now, once it's remember, it doesn't matter what I call them, because we talked about it earlier. Well, if we remember in Tehillim, chapter 19. Tehillim, chapter 19. I'm going to read something there. Tehillim 19 and verse 14. This is a common one that they even say in the church, right? It says, let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable in your sight, O Yahoo, my strength and my redeemer. But my point behind this is, they're talking about your heart, right? Well, he's talking about the meditations. Let the meditations of my, when it says, let the words of my mouth. Okay, so if I use the words of my mouth, it's what I say, and the meditations of my heart, what I believe in my heart. So my point is that if it's in my heart, I'm going to speak what's in my heart by what I understand. And so it takes two. It's not just what's in your heart, because the only one that knows your heart is the Father. But what you speak out, others can be blessed, others can understand what's in your heart by your works. Okay, and when, I'm sure you guys know a lot of scriptures about works and Shaul, and I'll probably get into a lot of Shaul's writings, and they kind of show you some things that have been added in Shaul's writings, or given credit to Shaul, and some things that he said he was saying, which if you read it in the Hebrew, Aramaic, or even the Greek for some matter, you'll see that some of those words weren't saying what it says in English. And then I am going to tackle some stuff about the Messiah, where it says, a lot of people says that the Messiah broke the law. So, for example, one of the famous ones that they give is when the lady that committed adultery. When she committed adultery, they brought her to the Mashiach, and he says, he writes in everyone, he's going to cast his first stone, and so each one starts to drop, and then he says, where's your accusers? And he says, I have none. He says, and then, I don't accuse you, sin no more. And I'm paraphrasing everything, but my point is, they're saying, see, technically he was supposed to stone her, because though they all might have had sin or things like that, he didn't. He was without sin, so why didn't he stone the lady? Because she committed adultery. Well, the problem is, they don't understand the law. The law didn't say that. The law says you bring her and him. So in other words, before I stone her, I need the one that she committed adultery with. You bring him, and we'll stone both of them. So the Messiah knew exactly what was going on. That's why he didn't stone her, because he wasn't there. The law said to have both. So he told what he told us, sin no more. Okay, so we'll go over a lot of these things and get deep more into those concepts about Messiah breaking the law. All right. The other thing I want to read was Tehillim 49 verse 3. Okay, 49 verse 3 states, my mouth shall speak wisdom, and the meditations of my heart shall give understanding. Okay, so that's what it's about, speaking out wisdom. Wisdom, showing wisdom is you seeking it out. I mean, if I have the wisdom now and understanding of the Messiah's name, I know it means salvation, and I know he came in the Father's name. And we're going to go over those scriptures in just a minute in our closing here. But my point is, that's what we do. We shed light and understanding to the Word. And a lot of times, as you see, since we know in Hebrew culture names mean a lot, it's because they walk a certain way. They're supposed to walk in their name. Okay, or walk in the calling that they were given. So it would be, because if that were so, it wouldn't need, the father would need to change from Abram to Abraham, Sarai to Sarah, and all these other names being changed. There would be no need to do that if it didn't matter. But obviously it does matter. And so the scripture tell you about us calling on his name, how important it is to call on his name. Secondly, do not take it in vain. That has nothing to do with authority. Name deals with authority, but not only does it deal with authority, but it deals with you saying the name. Now again, I'm not speaking of totally translating it to something else. My point is, when you do that, you're making a name in vain, or you're making it to uselessness or not. But if we're trying to come to the pronunciation of the name, then that's what we're trying to do. Rather you say Yeshua and I say Yahusha, the point is, I understand what you're saying, and you're saying, hey, listen, you're talking about the Messiah. If you say Jesus, I'm like, well, where'd you get it from? Okay, who came up with that name? Show it to me. As scripture says, prove all things, 1 Thessalonians 5:21. All right. In conclusion here, I got some scriptures, because I want to use some, they say it's in the Brit Hadashah. And one of them is Yahuchanan chapter 5, verse 43, which says, I come in my Father's name, right? So let's tell you one thing. I come in my Father's name, you receive me not. If another shall come in his own name, him you will receive. Okay? So, he did not just come in the Father's authority. He actually came in his Father's name, actual name. Okay? And we kind of went over that earlier today. Other thing is Yahuchanan 11:12, where it says, I will remain in the world no longer, that they are still in the world. And I am coming to you, set apart, Father, protect them by the power of your name. There's your authority, right? By the power of your name. And then he says, the name you gave me. Okay? It says, so that they may be one as we are one. While I was with them, I protected them and kept them safe by that name you gave me. Okay? So one speaks of authority, the other one speaks of a literal name that he gave them. Okay? And so therefore, and he says, I want them to be one as we are one. That's still not talking about Trinity. It's like saying the same thing. When a man and wife gets married, they become one. Okay, I still see two people, but they become one. Why? Because they don't understand the word one. The word one in Hebrew is echad. And echad means to be unified, to be in agreement. That's what one means. Okay? So because they don't understand that, i.e., modern Christianity, I guess, or even some of the Messianics, that believe in the Trinity, all three are one. Now, all three are in one agreement. If you even look at the 1611 in 1 John, it tells you one in agreement. When you get to the regular King James and 1 John, you'll see that the agreement word is gone. They took it out. Okay? So, but again, that's your research when you guys look that up. All right, well, this concludes my take on the Messiah's name, a little bit on the Father, why I say Yahu, or some say Yahuwah, and Yahusha, and the reason why and why the names mean exactly what it means when it came in the Father's name, and it means salvation. And then also, you know, that the Yiddish, you know, I kind of want to touch on that a little bit. And I'm trying to get all this finished so I actually can start working on the YouTube clip. I'm actually going to start from Bereshit, and I'm going to go over to Higalut, or which is considered Revelation. So I'm going to go from Bereshit or Genesis to Higalut, Revelations, and I'm going to do it in a lot of Hebrew. It's going to be in English, so you are going to be able to understand it, but I'm going to give you a lot of key Hebrew words along the way to get a more Hebraic understanding of the Scriptures. And so, but before I do that, I want to kind of debunk a little bit of why we're separating ourselves over names and titles and things like that. Same thing with Adonis. You know, people usually would say, oh, you know, Adonai is Adonis. Okay, so therefore it's bad. All right, well, the problem is the word Adonis came in the 600s, 600 BC. Okay, so but you got writings that had Adon and Adonai before the word Adonis ever existed. So because now they use the Adonis and things like that, now Adonai is bad. Now, it doesn't mean Lord and it doesn't mean Master. You say, well, that's what my concordance says. Well, if you decide to look at your concordance, look at the original root word of that. The original root word of that is in Hebrews number 113. If you look in Hebrew numbers 113, it says that word means sovereign. Okay, that's what it means. So when you have Adon, the word Adon means sovereign. When you have Adoni, it should be my sovereign. You don't turn into my master, you know, or my Lord. It's my sovereign. Okay. So, but my point is, you know, those are some of the titles that, you know, I'll probably I'll go over next time, because I really want to get rid of all this stuff, and so we can kind of focus as one. And you know, the most problems that we have as Hebrew Israelites, or as Hebrews in general, is getting an understanding of the word in a more Hebraic form versus the English. And so I want us to kind of start coming together, because time is drawing near, you know, and because time is drawing near, the adversary is at his best to separate or keep us separated as brothers and sisters, and that's not what this is about. You know what I mean? It's supposed to be us coming together, and as the scripture says, you know, 10 will take hold of one, and says the fathers inherited lies. Well, how can these things happen if we steady bickering amongst one another about how we should pronounce certain things and how it should be? Okay, so after I do that, I'll probably go over Chetzah or Esau. I'm going to go over who they are, you know, and especially Ishmael and Mitzrayim, and how they were married to each other. Obviously, Ishmael, or as you say, Ishmael, he married an Egyptian, or Mitzrayim, okay, and show how they interlinked and how they will always be in their brother's face. Who was his brother? Yashar'al. So I will go over all these things as we go through, but before I can do all that, I would like to kind of debunk a lot of the stuff that's separating us. So until then, I bid you shalom.